It is Monday, June 8th. I'm Sam Seder.
And I'm Lucie Steiner. Which one of these stories will you be talking about today?
Veto-proof majority of the Minneapolis City Council pledged to disband the city's police department following over a week of worldwide protests against police brutality. Meanwhile, New York City, the hardest-hit region of the U.S., is starting to take baby steps back toward normalcy, beginning phase one of reopening as the coronavirus epidemic begins to subside. And lastly, New York Times opinion section editor James Bennett resigned today after admitting that he didn't even read Senator Tom Cotton's op-ed about deploying troops to police American cities.
You're listening to Majority.fm's AM Quickie, and these are the stories you need to know.
In a historic, almost unprecedented move, the Minneapolis City Council announced on Sunday that it had a veto-proof majority of members pledged to disband the city's police department. In a written statement, City Council President Lisa Bender said, quote, "It is clear that our existing system of policing and public safety isn't working for so many of our neighbors. Our efforts at incremental reform have failed," end quote. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey said he opposed disbanding the department, which earned him a chorus of boos and jeers on Saturday night. But if the city council goes through with their plan, it'll be out of his hands. Question now is what community safety will look like in the absence of the MPD. City council hasn't offered any specifics. Camden, New Jersey famously disbanded its police force in 2013, but then rehired most of the officers in a new county-wide organization focused on community policing. It was a big improvement, but definitely shied more on the side of reforming rather than abolishing a deeply broken system. In other words, the organization might change, but a lot of the cops probably aren't going anywhere. New York City, after bungling nearly every other aspect of the government response to the protest, is also planning some reform. Mayor Bill de Blasio finally backed down and lifted the city's arbitrary curfew, and just in time, as he was about to get sued by the New York Civil Liberties Union. Big de Blas also committed to diverting a token amount of funding from the NYPD's absurd $6 billion budget to social services. He didn't say how much, but we're pretty sure it won't be enough. What we're seeing all over, however, is that direct action of widespread protests is truly making an impact. New York City felt the effects of the coronavirus harder than anywhere else in the country. But after 22,000 deaths and more than 200,000 cases, the city is very slowly starting to lift its lockdown restrictions. Today, the city will start phase one of its reopening, which allows construction, manufacturing, and retail to start up again. Retail stores will still operate in a limited capacity. Probably won't be able to browse like before, but they'll do curbside and in-store pickup for most orders. After initially failing to control the disease's spread, New York's leadership has poured money into testing and contact tracing. The New York Times reports that new cases are down to about 500 per day. Next down the line is phase two, in which New Yorkers will finally be able to get a haircut again, and most offices will open, given social distancing can be enforced. Problem is, the damage has largely been done because the city and state's leaders failed to get out in front of the disease. New York's lockdown has been crushing for businesses, axing 885,000 jobs. The city's economy isn't expected to really rebound until 2022.
Majority.fm's AM Quickie is fueled by JustCoffee.coop. Just Coffee is a worker-owned coffee roaster based in Madison, Wisconsin that has sponsored the Majority Report for nearly a decade. Check out their collection of fair trade roasts, including our own Majority Report blend. And regardless of what you order, receive 10% off your order when you use the code MAJORITY at checkout. And all shipping is free. That's coupon code MAJORITY at JustCoffee.coop.
The New York Times opinion section has been controversial for years, but last week it finally jumped the shark, and now the section's top editor is taking a hike. James Bennett, the editor of the Times opinion section, resigned on Sunday after his team published a deeply flawed, largely inaccurate, and incredibly racist op-ed by Senator Tom Cotton. The op-ed, titled, quote, "Send in the Troops," sent the Times newsroom into a frenzy, seeing as it misused historical comparisons and spread blatant fake news in order to make the case that the U.S. should send in the military to inflict further violence on protesters across the country. The Times usually has a pretty strict wall between the reporters and journalists in its newsroom and opinion havers in Bennett's section. But the Cotton op-ed was a step too far. sending the newsroom into open revolt as the Times' notoriously buttoned-up employees threw down the gloves and started firing back, posting a unified message on Twitter that running the Cotton piece could directly endanger black staff members. It turns out Bennett didn't even read the op-ed before it was published. His supporters, the usual cast of conservative big brains, are trying to paint this thing as another censorship of right-wing voices scenario. You can sort that one out for yourself, but know that Cotton's piece claimed that police had, quote, borne the brunt of the violence in the recent unrest, which he blamed on Antifa. And it's not like turning down Cotton's essay is denying him a platform. He's literally a sitting U.S. senator. Times Opinion has some great, thoughtful, incisive writers, but it's also got people like climate change denier Bret Stephens and college-obsessed PC culture critic Barry Weiss, not to mention the dusty old guard of David Brooks and Thomas Friedman. That's all to say it's definitely ripe for a change.
And now for some quicker quickies.
Quicker Quickie.
The ghouls at the White House are still doing what they do best. On Friday, Trump signed a proclamation handing over 5,000 square miles of previously protected waters off the coast of New England to commercial fishermen. Common Dreams reports that activists are worried the move will put several endangered species in delicate ecosystems at risk. According to the Seattle Times, a man drove into a crowd of protesters on Sunday evening, then got out, brandished a gun, shooting and wounding a protester who tried to stop him. In the same city, police ran rampant again, covering the streets in tear gas just days after they'd promised to stop using it for an entire month. Speaking of protesters, one thread to follow is that crowd size is not in any way dying down. Protests in New York City, LA, and several other major cities was absolutely massive yesterday. This according to anecdotal reports on social media. It's hard to estimate crowd size when there are dozens of protests across a city in a single day, but one thing's for sure, they're still big. Cops in Austin, Texas, posted pictures of a massive pile of thank you notes, which they claimed were from, quote, several community members to include kindergartners and Austin families, end quote. Funnily enough, many of the cards were addressed in the same handwriting, and all of the kindergartners in Texas are still closed because of the coronavirus. Since the protest started, the Austin Police Department has shot 2 people in the head with beanbag rounds.
Quicker Quickie.
That's it, folks. Thanks for listening to the Majority.fm's AM Quickie. Sam?
Thanks, Lucie. That's right. Alex Vitale will be joining us today live on the Majority Report at noon and later as a podcast as we talk about what to do with police forces around the country. Stay safe, everyone.